Buckle up. This is bigger than scandal. From secret deportations and Supreme Court defiance to Musk-Trump warfare, veterans abandoned, and billionaires clashing like alien versus predator, American democracy faces a new stress test. Welcome to Miles Vexler Reaction, where we pull no punches on power, corruption, and accountability.
Hi there, everybody. It's 4 o'clock in New York. We come on the air with breaking news. A federal grand jury has indicted Kilmar Abrego Garcia. He is the Maryland man and Salvadoran national who was deported by the Trump administration in violation of a court order. He is now being charged with 2 counts: conspiracy to unlawfully transport illegal aliens for financial gains and unlawful transportation of illegal aliens for financial gains. That is according to a copy of the indictment obtained by NBC News. Other news organizations are also reporting that Abrego Garcia is returning home to the United States to face those 2 charges. We should note NBC News has not confirmed that piece of the report. An attorney for Kilmar Abrego Garcia is reacting to the reporting by saying this, quote, "The government disappeared Kilmar to a foreign prison in violation of a court order. Now, after months of delay and secrecy, they are bringing him back, not to correct their error, but to prosecute him. This shows that they were playing games with the court all along. Due process means the chance to defend yourself before you are punished, not after. This is an abuse of power, not justice. The government should put him on trial, yes, but in front of the same immigration judge who heard his case in 2019, which is the ordinary manner of doing things, to ensure that his case is handled as it would have been had he not been improperly sent to El Salvador as the Supreme Court ordered." Any moment now, Attorney General Pam Bondi will hold a press conference. We actually can confirm now that he has landed in the United States. So knowing that, we are going to listen in to Pam Bondi for a minute.
Conspiracy to commit alien smuggling in violation of Title 8 U.S.C. 1324. We want to thank President Bukele for agreeing to return Abrego Garcia to the United States. Our government presented El Salvador with an arrest warrant, and they agreed to return him to our country. We're grateful to President Bukele for agreeing to return him to our country to face these very serious charges. This is what American justice looks like. Upon completion of his sentence, we anticipate he will be returned to his home country of El Salvador. The grand jury found that over the past 9 years, Abrego Garcia has played a significant role in an alien smuggling ring. They found this was his full-time job, not a contractor. He was a smuggler of humans and children and women. He made over 100 trips, the grand jury found, smuggling people throughout our country, MS-13 members, violent gang terrorist organization members throughout our country. Thousands of illegal aliens were smuggled. This is especially disturbing because Abrego Garcia is also alleged with transporting minor children. The defendant traded the innocence of minor children for profit. There are even more disturbing facts that the grand jury uncovered. It is alleged this defendant is part of the same smuggling ring responsible for the death of more than 50 migrants in 2021 after the tractor trailer overturned in Mexico. This is part of that same ring. The defendant abused undocumented alien females, according to co-conspirators who were under his control while transporting them throughout our country. This defendant trafficked firearms and narcotics throughout our country on multiple occasions. They were using vehicles, SUVs, with added seats in the back, floors that had been ripped out, guns, narcotics, children, women, MS-13 members. That is what the grand jury found. A co-conspirator alleged that the defendant solicited nude photographs and videos of a minor. A co-conspirator also alleges the defendant played a role in the murder of a rival gang member's mother. These facts demonstrate Abrego Garcia is a danger to our community. We want to thank the Department of Homeland Security, the FBI, our state and local partners, our acting U.S. Attorney Robert McGuire, and prosecutors from the Joint Task Force Vulcan. Questions?
Attorney General, the traffic stop that we've seen video of from Tennessee, where Abrego Garcia was first identified by the local authorities, at the time, the Homeland Security Department declined to take custody of him. What has happened in between that time and in between the time that the government has been arguing that he was not returnable from El Salvador? What has happened since in this investigation that brought you here?
Yes, the question was in 2021, there was the traffic stop. And what has changed since then? What has changed is Donald Trump is now president of the United States and our borders are again secure. And thanks to the bright light that has been shined on Abrego Garcia, this investigation continued with actually amazing police work. And we were able to track this case and stop this international smuggling ring from continuing.
But these were recently found facts, right?
Yes, okay. Recently found facts.
To that point, can you just explain when this investigation was opened? The investigation in Tennessee, can you say when that investigation was opened?
Well, the grand jury indicted on May 21st. This investigation has been ongoing.
This case has been hotly debated here in Washington. In your mind, does this resolve that issue in terms of his deportation? And should this be seen in any way as complying with the judge's order to return him to the U.S. and the Supreme Court ruling that the U.S. government should facilitate his return?
Well, there's a big difference between what the state of play was before the indictment and after the indictment. And so the reason why he is back and was returned was because there's an arrest warrant, which was presented to the government in El Salvador. So there's a big difference there. As far as whether it makes the ongoing litigation in Maryland moot, I would think so, but we don't know that. This, he just landed today.
Jake, CBS.
I just want to confirm what you said earlier, that you're intending to prosecute him and keep him in an American prison if he's found guilty, and then would remove him after his sentence is over.
Correct. Yes, he will be prosecuted in our country, sentenced in our country if convicted, and then returned after completion of his sentence.
Last one, Sadie, Wall Street Journal.
Okay. Two. One's on topic, one's off topic. Maybe I misunderstood you, but you were mentioning, that he had some involvement in a murder, or was connected to groups that had, involved with this other smuggling ring. But to be clear, the only charges he's facing right now are the, human smuggling charges. Just that's the one offense. But the other things that you have talked about are not actually in the indictment?
No, co-conspirators allege that, and we were clear to say that. He is charged with, it's not only very serious charges of alien smuggling. And again, there were children involved in that. Human trafficking, not only in our country, but in our world, is very, very real. It's very dangerous. And as you saw recently in Virginia, the arrest we made of the MS-13 member, unrelated to this, we learned at that press conference, that's where they bring young children into our country and they start grooming them at middle school age to become MS-13 full-fledged members, commit violent crimes throughout our country. It is highly organized. It is very dangerous. And they are living throughout our country, but no more, because they are being arrested, they are being prosecuted, and being convicted and deported when appropriate. That's all for today. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
We have been watching U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi and Todd Blanche, one of her deputies at the department. I want to bring in my colleague, MSNBC legal correspondent Lisa Rubin, as well as former U.S. Attorney and former Deputy Assistant Attorney General Harry Litman, also joining us, MSNBC political analyst, host of the Bulwark podcast, Tim Miller, and MSNBC senior political analyst, Matt Dowd. I want to share with our viewers a few more pieces of information that have crossed the wire. Van Hollen, Senator Van Hollen, who had traveled to see his constituent, to see Kilmar Abrego Garcia in El Salvador, is out with this statement, quote, "For months, the Trump administration flouted the Supreme Court and our Constitution. Today, they appear to have finally relented to our demands for compliance with court orders and with the due process rights afforded to everyone in the United States. As I have repeatedly said, this is not about the man. It is about his constitutional rights and the rights of all. The administration will now have to make its case in the court of law, as it should have done all along." So, Lisa Rubin, moving to the court of law, what we learned today is that a criminal investigation commenced, I think Pam Bondi confirms, after he's deported.
I didn't hear that as clearly as you did, but it wouldn't surprise me if that's what she confirmed today. Nicole, I was really focused on her description of the conduct and also the allegations that somebody asked about at the very end of the press conference, asking, you're making a number of very serious allegations, but I just want to be clear, the charges that are here are just human trafficking charges. They're about the transport of undocumented aliens, and Pam Bondi confirmed that that is true. But if you read this 10-page indictment, it is replete with other kinds of allegations about the trafficking, for example, of firearms, the abuse of female undocumented aliens, the complicity of MS-13 and its role in this alleged human smuggling ring. There's a whole lot more here, and a lot here that suggests that multiple of the 6 alleged co-conspirators may also be cooperating with the government as well.
What she said was, when she was asked about the timing, and she said, quote, "When the bright light of press coverage came to this case, great police work happened." And then when followed up, she said, and Donald Trump was elected. So I'm not sure that there was bright light of press coverage before the deportation, but maybe there was. You're right. We don't have crystal clarity on the timeline. Let me come to you, Harry Litman, on what you heard today.
Okay. Something to really keep in mind is federal conspiracy law, which is a very potent tool, is doing a lot of work here. What has basically happened, and this is my read as well, Nicole, is that after there was a lot of, has been the most contentious deportation. They erred and denied it and bobbed and weaved, but this is their way of trying to grab victory from the jaws of defeat. They have found a cooperating witness. There are 6 of them, as Lisa says, but one in particular in Florida says, I was the head guy here. I ran a whole service with a taxi service, as it were, taking people from Texas when they just come over into the interior. And I hired Abrego Garcia a few times. Now that by itself is enough to give him potential liability for everything that the conspiracy does. So something to keep in mind is, even if he's legally culpable for some of this more incendiary conduct that she inappropriately surfaced in the press conference, it may well be through conspiracy law, because there are 2 charges here. One is he did it on one occasion, and we knew about this in 2022. He's stopped by Tennessee police. There are 8 people in the car, but they let him go. And then he joins this conspiracy for 9 years. But the head guy in the conspiracy appears to be a cooperating witness in Florida, and the charges of conspiracy work to tag him with everything the conspiracy has done. They do allege one more thing in addition to what Lisa said, that he is a member of MS-13. Doesn't have to be to prove the charges, but it's interesting that they proffer that, since they've been saying it for a couple months.
Let me ask what maybe a silly question, but why not present this evidence in the context of his deportation in the first place?
They want to punish him. They first want to, in fact, get him in jail for a couple years and then deport him, presumably with due process. But I think this really is their way of what's been a very kind of impacted dispute to say, aha, we're bringing him back, and he is the bad guy that we said. And I think that's the reason for the conspiracy charges in particular.
Is it at all relevant that she said that the bright light of press coverage is what puts in motion the police work?
I got to say, I can't stand hearing her press conferences with the indictments because she goes so outside the four corners. The short answer is no. They're allowed to tell the story at trial of how they initiated this investigation. I think it's pretty clear that they went, she said there's new information, that they went to all these folks after there was already this raging controversy, and that's when they got the 5 cooperators as well as this guy in Florida. So it figures in the story, but I think its entry here into her personal way of telling it is a way of saying, see, we were right all along. Donald Trump was right all along. This guy has been dangerous all along, although it has everything to do with the conspiracy charges rather than specific conduct that, at least in the indictment, he's alleged to have done.
Nicole, can I add something about the timeline if I can? One of the reasons it's sort of confusing when this investigation started is because there was public outrage about Abrego Garcia's having been deported long before the Supreme Court said, you may not do this and you must facilitate his release and return to the United States. So just to refresh everybody's recollection, Abrego Garcia was on one of 3 planes that left the United States on March 15th. 2 of those planes were the subject of an injunction by a D.C. federal judge who said, if you have to turn the planes around, you do it. And nonetheless, all 3 of them flew on to El Salvador. But it wasn't until April 10th, nearly a month later, that the Supreme Court said what you did to this particular person who had an order from a judge saying he could not be sent to El Salvador. It wasn't until then that the Supreme Court said you must facilitate his release and return. And that's when really the drumbeat of public opinion began to turn against the White House. And you saw Trump talking about, for example, the alleged tattoos on his knuckles corresponding to his MS-13 membership, because they could not convince people that a father of many children married to a U.S. citizen who has a special needs child was the threat to America that the White House was portraying him to be.
And I guess I want to ask you, Tim Miller, where this conversation goes. I mean, we had the notable political moment of Chuck Grassley's constituents saying to Chuck Grassley, bring him home. All that was about due process. And I wonder where you think what got through to the public was that he was deported without this step being taken, without being charged, without standing trial, without having a chance to defend himself from, as Pam Bondi said, I would agree, 2 very serious criminal charges and a grand jury indictment.
Yeah. Well, to me, I think here's the political opportunity. As we learned today that they can bring people back from El Salvador, the people that they sent there. And so that is a development that is important and relevant for the other 250 people they sent there. And, I think what do is make this, a court TV drama where you get into all of the nitty-gritty details of what happened in Kilmar Abrego Garcia's life. Nothing any of us know anything about or knew anything about or would have known about or would have cared about, probably, frankly, before they sent him illegally to a foreign prison. And so I think that rather than focus on that, like the political opportunity for those of us who've been fighting for due process rights for the people that have been sent to El Salvador, is to take the lens back and say, look, our government kidnapped about 250 to 300 people and sent them to a foreign prison. They didn't deport them. They sent them to a foreign prison with no due process. And some of those people might be very bad people. Some of those people might be criminals. Some of those people might be illegal immigrants. Some of those people might have done absolutely nothing wrong. We know at least that a handful of them came to the country legally, through legal process. We know at least in a couple of specific cases that it feels preposterous to think that a makeup artist, was part of Tren de Aragua, for one example, when it comes to Andre Hernandez Romero. And so I think that talking about that and saying, well, look, you guys could do it right if you wanted to. And Pam Bondi said in that press conference that this is American justice. It's like, no, it's not. American justice is you have many options. They could deport people through the normal deportation process, or they could do what they just did today and show to a grand jury, show to a court of law that the men that they disappeared to El Salvador, all 200 some odd of them, committed crimes. And I think it's pretty clear that that is not the case. I think it's pretty clear that we wrongly sent some people there. They are going to try to focus on Abrego Garcia because they think the specifics of that case is a winner for them politically. But I don't know. I think that there is also an opportunity in the fact that they've demonstrated they can bring people back, and they should bring those the folks back that they wrongly deported. And I should just say, right after this, I'm going down to the Supreme Court, and that we're having a rally with the Immigrant Defenders Law Organization that's defending Andre and the other Venezuelans that were wrongly sent to El Salvador.
Tim, let me follow up with you, and I know you're involved in those cases, but let me just not let the news cycle get so charged that we forget what we learned from the Trump administration itself. Tricia McLaughlin, a Department of Homeland Security spokeswoman, said in a statement on May 21st, Mr. Abrego Garcia's deportation was part of a, quote, highly sensitive counterterrorism operation with national security implications. I mean, the Attorney General of the United States of America just stood before the world and said nothing about a, quote, highly sensitive counterterrorism operation with national security implications. The DHS spokesperson on May 21st, about 8 days ago, went on to say, we invoke the state secrets privilege over many of the details. Of course, our officials discuss what should be divulged publicly. This just proves they're responsible public servants. You know, their stories have changed so many times. I guess that's my point. I want to share one more piece of information about this specific case that we know from the Trump administration itself. The Trump administration, a mistake had been made. That much was clear. The Trump administration had deported a Maryland man named Kilmar Abrego Garcia to a prison in El Salvador, even though a judge had issued a ruling prohibiting that from happening. When news reached DHS, it set off a days-long scramble and clashes among officials in 3 different agencies over how to deal with what everyone knew had been an error. As it became clear that keeping it quiet was not an option, DHS officials floated a series of ideas to control the story that raised alarms among the Justice Department lawyers on the case. In the days before the government's error became public, DHS officials discussed trying to portray Abrego Garcia as a, quote, leader of the violent street gang MS-13, even though they could find no evidence to support the claim. I guess my question is about, you know, the evidence will stand in a court of law and a jury will decide its veracity. So I'm not making any comment about the evidence, but the process, in terms of what we know from Trump senior officials, feels reverse engineered.
Absolutely. I just want to say first, I'm only involved in these cases to the extent that I'm a person that watches the news and has a podcast and is very upset that our government is kidnapping people and sending them to foreign gulags without giving them due process. And I'm going to keep talking about it until those folks are freed and given their day in court as they deserve. And I think that to your point, like the one thing that we know for sure that is evidenced today by what they brought, by what Pam Bondi brought forth in that press conference, is that they've been lying about this. Like from day one, they've been lying to the courts and they've been lying to the public about the rationale and the case for sending Abrego Garcia to El Salvador. So maybe there is a good case for a grand jury to put him behind bars in this, or to, you know, to suggest that he have a trial and then have a jury put him behind bars in this country. Maybe there's a good case for that. We'll find out. But we know that their case for why they needed to send him to a foreign prison without any due process was premised on false statements. And we know that just by that list of things you just laid out. And that matters. Like, our government cannot just make things up about people and use it as a rationale to send them to foreign countries. That's not how things work in a free country, no matter whether that person, you know, has other legal issues, which should be adjudicated here in this country.
Harry, let me ask you about one more Trump administration official. This is also from the New York Times on May 21st. Quote, in the end, a senior Justice Department lawyer, Erez Raveni, who counseled bringing Abrego Garcia back to the U.S., was fired for what Attorney General Pam Bondi said was a failure to, quote, zealously advocate on behalf of the United States. Now, all that DOJ lawyer advised was bringing him back to do what Pam Bondi did today. Receive due process, face the charges against him, and have an opportunity to stand trial and be judged by a jury of his peers. Do you think he will be reinstated by Pam Bondi?
No, I don't think so. And really, this goes right to what Tim is saying. This is a person whose 15-year career was simply ended in DOJ for telling the court the truth. They were fighting a real losing battle here, and I think the effort to sort of dovetail with what Tim's saying was to replace or supersede this due process discourse that they were losing, they were lying about and bobbing and weaving and just not persuading anyone with a new criminal indictment process. The due process stuff now goes away unless and until they deport him again. So this is their way of changing the subject, but still saying Donald Trump, this guy was a really bad guy, and fortunately we were able to show that. But they were getting their brains beat in on the due process, the discourse, and this enables them to say, see, it's all about criminal conduct before.
I think it's important to underscore something that Tim Miller said, that we know from Tim Miller and from Pam Bondi that it is possible for the leader of El Salvador to send people back here to do what they're doing, to give them due process. And it is possible to abide by, I think, a 7-2 Supreme Court opinion to, quote, facilitate a prisoner's return to the United States. All positions they had, at best, flip-flopped on. Everyone sticks around. We're going to bring Matt Dowd into the conversation.
Trump's administration illegally deported Kilmar Abrego Garcia despite court orders. After months of secrecy, he was returned and charged with human smuggling, involving MS-13, drugs, firearms, and child exploitation. Critics argue the government abused power, violated due process, and only pursued criminal charges to justify prior misconduct. But legal experts now question whether these charges are genuine, or a reverse-engineered cover-up after public backlash.
We're back with Lisa, Harry, and Matt. Matt, a couple of poll numbers have stuck in my mind over the last 4 months. One is New York Times Siena polling that says 87% of all Americans support the deportation of adjudicated criminals. And that is very much in line with what President Obama pursued a policy to make happen. 9, 15, and 12% of Americans support deporting people that haven't committed crimes other than being here illegally, who are married to Americans, who have jobs here, who have been here for decades, respectively. It would appear that if they can prove in a court of law, after giving him due process, that he committed crimes, that would be something that in the main Americans support. But I wonder what you make of the process and how it's fleshed out. I use the word reverse engineered, but such an incompetent and incomplete process.
Well, I was, before you said the word reverse engineered, it was the word I was thinking, actually. To me, and I'm not a lawyer on this, and I defer to the legal issues and all this, the whole thing smells. I mean, completely smells, because even watching Pam Bondi's press conference, my takeaway from that is it's deplorable, because what she basically is making an argument. One, she doesn't even presume this person is innocent. She just makes these outlandish claims and then says, oh, but we're only filing charges for these couple, but we're going to make these outlandish claims because it's going to serve the public relations standpoint in this. The whole thing is they violated this man's civil rights in violation of not one, but multiple court orders. And then and we'll get a better sense of the timing of this. What it looks like happened is they were caught. And then in order to, quote unquote, save the PR war, they don't sort of apologize and said, we messed up on due process and it's unfortunate and we'll do that. They don't do that. What they immediately sounds to me and looks to me like they do is go and say, full bore, let's sick our attack dogs on this, find something. Because if all of this was known when he got deported, and I would have argued with anybody that it wasn't true, they would have presented this evidence months ago. And so it all, like they screwed up, they violated his civil rights, they violated court orders, and then when they were caught, they were busted, they still didn't follow a Supreme Court order, and that their rationale now is, oh, by the way, we did all this wrong, but he's a bad guy because we've decided he's a bad guy and we found a bunch of evidence. Therefore, what I think they're trying to argue is trust us on all future endeavors because we found a bad guy even though we did it wrongly. And that's what stinks about this, is that it's a complete ends justify the means. And even her press conference today was a total ends justify. It wasn't seeking justice, and it's not what American justice is supposed to be. It is basically, we're going to engineer this in such a way as we decide somebody we don't like, and we're going to do with them what we want. And when they're caught, when we're caught, we're going to bring the full force of the American government to try to find anything we possibly can to rationalize the mistakes we made to begin with.
And again, Matthew, there's a lot of reporting in the record that quotes from internal documents from the Trump administration that corroborates your theory. Let me read from some of that. This is again from the New York Times story from May 21st. They write that Mr. Reveni, who's the DOJ lawyer who admitted that he'd been mistakenly deported, in a series of email correspondence, says this to a group of other officials in the Trump administration. The Kilmer-Abrego case, quote, potentially jeopardizes many far more important initiatives of the current administration. If the government fought and lost, it could have legal repercussions, not least of which for the nearly 140 Venezuelans who were sent to the same facility under the authority of a rarely used wartime law, the Alien Enemies Act of 1798. Ultimately, 3 courts, including the United States Supreme Court, pushed back against the Trump White House, ordering Trump officials to at least take steps toward freeing Mr. Kilmer-Abrego Garcia. But Mr. Trump and some of his top aides have taken a defiant stance, insisting that Mr. Abrego Garcia will not be coming back to the United States. It is a reversal. It is, as with the tariff story that we leave with most days, it is a changed position. It is absolutely appropriate, right, if someone has committed crimes, to deport them. That is not at all the story that they have been telling about this man and this case to, as the story points out, to 3 courts, including the U.S. Supreme Court.
Yeah, and it's almost as if all of us who've been raising this due process concern, everyone on this panel, including you in this, have been raising this due process concern and constitutional concern that we have in this. It's almost as if what they're doing, and her attitude today, Pam Bondi's, the Attorney General's attitude today was very underlined. This was all you annoying people out there that constantly talk about the Constitution and due process and all of that. All you annoying people, well, look what we did. We found he was a bad guy. And even though we annoyed you and all this Constitution stuff and it, this, superfluous arguments that you're making, I'm speaking as if for them, we found out he's a bad guy, and we've determined he's a bad guy even before he's actually put before a jury in a court of law and is able to defend himself. That's what this is. It's we annoy her and Donald Trump because we're making an argument that the constitutional protections belong to everyone. And they're basically like, he's bad, we decided it, it doesn't matter.
It's an unbelievable moment, I think, in this, a real inflection point in the second Trump administration, and something we'll, I think, be talking about for a while. I mean, I was just so struck by Pam Bondi's causal tie between the, quote, bright light of press coverage and the incredible police work that followed. And obviously, that's, to Harry's point, probably happens all the time, but for her to say that out loud about a case that has really brought, for the first time ever, the president of our country to say, I'm not sure that it's my job to uphold the Constitution. I don't know if upholding the Constitution is my job, Harry.
Yeah, and I just want to make a very quick fall-on legal point because I agree with everything he said. That's going to be the battle at trial if it goes to trial. They're going to try to get in this backstory that everyone knows, and the law, just to cut to the chase, is they're probably not going to be able to do that. They'll want to have all these details about the prosecution, the investigation, the terrible egg on the face of the United States, and probably a jury will not hear it.
Harry Litman, thank you for joining us. Lisa, you're going to be back in the next hour with us. Matt Dowd sticks around. When we come back...
Legal analysts accuse the Trump administration of manipulating legal procedures. They argue that instead of admitting constitutional violations, authorities fabricated criminal indictments to retroactively justify Garcia's deportation. This tactic shifts attention from due process failures to criminal charges. masking systemic abuses in immigration enforcement. Meanwhile, another explosive battle unfolds. Trump's escalating feud with Elon Musk threatens billion-dollar contracts and national security stability.
The ugly, rip-roaring feud that gives anything you've ever seen on reality TV a run for its money, that is still ongoing between Elon Musk and Donald Trump, is that proverbial crash scene that no one can look away from. Today, Donald Trump referred to Musk as, quote, the man who lost his mind in an interview with ABC's John Carl, adding that he's not talking to him. He's not going to call him first. He's, quote, not interested in talking to Elon Musk. And to keep the bad breakup parallel going, where you throw out all the stuff you ever got from your ex and all the T-shirts you ever borrowed from them. There's reporting now that Trump's considering giving away the Tesla he bought at a highly inappropriate event on the White House lawn 2 months ago that experts at the time described as a blatant violation of ethics rules, corruption playing out in public, they said. Senator Chris Murphy called it that at the time. But beyond the schoolyard taunts and the very public, very nasty feuding between the two men, the spectacle, I likened it yesterday to two tarantulas in a bowl. The reason we care and the reason we're covering it for a second day is, one, Trump doesn't want us to, and two, there are real stakes for the American people and how this ends. The stakes speak to the enormous power Elon Musk inappropriately accumulated / purchased. Take, for example, Musk's threat to decommission SpaceX's Dragon spacecraft, which he later retracted after somebody on his platform asked him to on X. Politico reports this, quote, Musk's threat would deprive the U.S. of its only assured way of supplying the International Space Station and bringing on and off astronauts. If executed, NASA would instead have to rely on Russia to bring supplies and astronauts to the station. Imagine that, Elon Musk or Russia. Not clear what Trump would choose, right? At least not to me. That threat was in response to Trump, who attacked Musk by saying, I'm going to end all your federal contracts for all of Musk's companies. Something that, again, ethically and normally might be the right thing to do, but because he's so embedded, would cause utter chaos for the U.S. military if it's done in the spirit and context and the moment of this fight. Washington Post reports this, quote, over the years, SpaceX has become a vital contractor, launching sensitive national security payloads such as satellites that provide missile warning, battlefield communication, and guide munitions to precise targets. NPR reports this, quote, SpaceX's Starlink satellite network is a player in a multi-billion-dollar federal effort to expand internet access to underserved parts of the country. Trump was fine with all that commingling of his donor and the United States federal government and Musk's businesses, all those contracts on which NASA, the Pentagon, millions of actual human beings depend on, until Musk went there, attacked his big, not-so-beautiful bill, and invoked his presence in the Epstein files, something for which there is no publicly known evidence. The Bulwark puts it like this, quote, the disquieting reality continues to hang in the air. Major parts of our government rely on a return to goodwill between two of the most arrogant and emotionally unbalanced men alive. In what world is that not a massive national security risk? Joining our conversation is Tyler Pager. He's a White House correspondent for the New York Times. He's co-author of the soon-to-be-released book, 2024. Matt Dowd is still here as well. Tyler, where are we? And, you know, like Sands Through the Hourglass, you're too young to even know what that is, Days of Our Lives soap opera. But where are we in this very public fight between Elon Musk and Donald Trump?
Yeah, I think we're just waiting to see what the next step might be. We saw Elon Musk, as you mentioned, Nicole, position himself as willing to potentially have a détente with Trump, responding to people on X last night who were encouraging him to lay down the weapons and sort of return to some semblance of a relationship. But the president has seemingly shown no interest in that outreach. White House officials telling me that the president had no plans to call Elon Musk, despite some reporting that that may happen. Trump doing a round of brief interviews with reporters this morning, saying he's not all that concerned about Elon Musk and he's focused on the economy and the bill that Musk has spent the last several days assailing on social media. But Nicole, I think your point and your intro here is really important. It's easy to get caught up in the war of words and the personal insults and taunts, but what lies at the heart of this relationship is, of two of the most powerful men in the world, is an extreme reliance on the federal government on some of Elon Musk's companies. And so that threat from President Trump yesterday about potentially cutting those contracts and subsidies and other relationships between the government and Musk companies represents not only an existential threat potentially to Musk companies, but also to the operations of some of the critical functions of the U.S. government. So obviously this alliance was forged in sort of unpredictable ways over the campaign trail as Musk poured his own money into helping Trump get elected. And then we saw them rummage through the federal government through the DOGE effort. But beyond that, the relationship between the government and the private companies is really quite critical for both parties. And so I think that there is some interest, at least from allies of both men, of lowering the temperature. But as we saw yesterday, it's quite unpredictable what could come next. And so we're just watching both of their social media platforms that they own, X for Musk and Truth Social for Trump, to see what direction this might head in next.
Tyler, I don't want to let the seriousness of the charge that Musk makes get lost in the flurry of barbs. This is what Elon Musk said about almost exactly 24 hours ago. Quote, "Time to drop the really big bomb. Real Donald Trump is in the Epstein files. That is the real reason they have not been made public. Have a nice day." Is there any line of open reporting that supports that? Where is that? What is that? Where does that come from?
Yeah, there is a lot of nuggets and details about speculation about Donald Trump's potential naming in those files. Part of it comes from the fact that Trump did have a relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. White House officials countered that assertion by Elon Musk very aggressively last night, saying there's no evidence of that, and also noting that Trump, severed his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. But that accusation from Musk is essentially the equivalent of Musk going nuclear on Trump, really leveling a severe accusation against the president that the president and his allies were very frustrated and disturbed by. So it is, as you said, a serious accusation. There is no known evidence of Trump being noted in those files or named in those files. But you're right, Nicole, it's important to note that Musk did level not just that one post that you showed, but a series of posts linking Trump to Epstein and those documents. And I think just to take a step back, one thing we should note is obviously the trove of documents about Jeffrey Epstein has been a cause célèbre for the MAGA base and Republicans who have pushed Trump to fully release all of those documents. So part of that dig there from Musk was sort of an appeal to that MAGA base that has been salivating over the potential that they would get full purview into those documents.
Yeah, and I think it's important for viewers of our program to know, actually my viewers may already know this, but for a broader audience to understand, it cross-pressures Kash Patel and I always forget his name, Dan Bongino, because they have sort of flirted with those conspiracy theories before they were inside the government. So it's a real live wire in the MAGA base. And before anyone says, well, they're unfounded rumors, I mean, so was the notion that Trump had won in 2020, and look what that led to. I want to bring Matt Dowd in on all of this, as well as the nuclear response. I mean, this is mutually assured destruction if we're going to keep the nuclear parallels going. I want to show that to you. It comes from Steve Bannon, and it involves deporting Elon Musk. Matt Dowd gets in on this on the other side.
Trump and Musk's bitter feud intensifies. Trump attacks Musk, threatening federal contracts. Musk retaliates, invoking Epstein allegations. The fallout endangers national security, with NASA, Pentagon, and federal agencies reliant on Musk's companies. Their personal conflict now risks critical government operations, triggering bipartisan alarm over stability and governance. And just when you think it can't get messier, Steve Bannon jumps in, calling for Musk's deportation.
He crossed the Rubicon. You can't listen. It's one thing to make comments about the spending on the bill. There's another thing about what he did. Okay, you can't sit there and first off try to destroy the bill. You can't come out and say kill the president's most important legislative occurrence of this first term, number one. Number two, he crossed the Rubicon by this outrageous comparison to the Epstein files about saying President Trump should be impeached or replaced by J.D. Vance. This is so outrageous and has crossed the line. He's crossed the Rubicon, and there's no going back.
Oh, baby, we've all crossed the Rubicon. Matt Dowd, you get the last word.
I mean, I'm struggled to come up with the appropriate cultural reference for what's going on here. I've thought about King Kong versus Godzilla. I've thought about Freddy versus Jason. The best one I could come up with, and it's like Alien versus Predator, because it basically describes both of them. All of those three things have in common is that when that fight occurs, there is a ton of collateral damage and innocent people suffer in the midst of that. And as I watch this unfold, my only hope in this is this sort of immature bro culture that Donald Trump and Elon Musk both seem to sort of celebrate and become a part of, that we look at that and say, maybe that's not the direction we should elect leaders from or bring people into the government from. These are like two adolescent boys who are sitting in their basement playing a video game, and one gets mad and says his girlfriend's ugly. And the problem is the video game is connected, like Matthew Broderick's character in War Games, to a real world actions. And they're sitting there saying, okay, if you say that, I'm going to launch this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this. And the amount of collateral damage that can come from this, this, as I say, alien versus predator fight, drag out, drag down, it is amazing. But I hope it gives us an insight into the idea of maybe we should pick our leaders a little bit differently.
But what breaks the cycle? I mean, I think it also, Matt Dowd, reveals the hermetically sealed information bubble.
Well, that's been part of the problem. But I think part of what can break the hermetically sealed is when two titans of the movement begin to go after each other. And then I think you're left with a lot of people in the MAGA world of like, I thought I was supposed to love Donald Trump and love Elon Musk and all what they're doing. And now it looks like they hate each other and they disagree with what they're doing. Where am I supposed to go? My hope is that part of this unfolding, while incredibly embarrassing on the global stage and incredibly destructive because of the levers of power that exist in the country and who might get hurt in this, it might reveal to people that maybe just voting for people because you want to own the libs isn't the right strategy.
We can hope. I'll associate myself with your hope. I'll take a second to defend adolescent boys. I am the mother of one, and they do not act like this. I'll stick with tarantulas in a bowl. I think they do. Tyler Pager and Matt Dowd, thank you for being part of our coverage. Still ahead for us.
Steve Bannon demands Elon Musk be deported, accusing him of betraying Trump by opposing his legislation and invoking Epstein. Bannon claims Musk crossed a political Rubicon, escalating GOP infighting. Analysts compare the Trump-Musk war to destructive clashes like Alien versus Predator, warning of severe collateral damage. While billionaires feud, veterans are fighting a different battle against Trump's deep cuts to their health care and benefits.
Do you have any concern about some of the government cuts under the Trump administration, how that might impact veterans?
I do, because he's trying to cut some of the veteran benefits that we're having, which I think if you serve, you should be able to get the benefits that's due to you. But now he's coming in, he's trying to cut this part and that part.
This is very much about veterans, and it shouldn't be a party-based issue, in my opinion. Yeah.
So you don't see this rally as like an anti-Trump or anti-administration rally? This
Well,
is
it can be anti-administration as long as he remains anti-veteran.
And you see Donald Trump in this moment as
very much as anti-veteran, yes.
There you had it. Very much at this moment, Donald Trump is anti-veteran. Hi again, everybody. It's now 5 o'clock in New York today. On the 81st anniversary of D-Day, roughly 2,000 veterans and their allies are rallying on the National Mall in D.C., advocating for the rights of those who served our country and protesting the Trump administration's drastic cuts to the Department of Veterans Affairs, the VA. Elon Musk's DOGE team already made slashes to the department. Those slashes disrupted care that is given to our country's vets, where we saw things like clinical trials delayed, contracts being canceled, and support staff fired. Back in March, a leaked memo from the department's chief of staff revealed a plan to majorly restructure, which includes cutting more than 80,000 jobs from the agency that would take place later this year. The Trump administration, including VA Secretary Doug Collins, maintains that essential positions would not be cut and there would be no, quote, surprise firings. But with the magnitude of the proposed staffing cuts, it begs the question, how could care for our vets possibly go uninterrupted? Currently, the Veterans Affairs Administration serves more than 9 million vets each year and provides care at nearly 1,400 healthcare facilities. Additionally, veterans themselves make up 25% of the agency's workforce. So this chipping away at resources and funding and staffing and the safety of those who sacrificed their time, their efforts, in most cases, their physical and mental well-being in service of our nation is only magnified as Donald Trump continues his ridiculous crusade against his former bestie, Elon Musk, a fight our friend Paul Rieckhoff puts in stark terms. He posted this, quote, "Keep in mind, this is also now an open fight between the commander-in-chief and one of the biggest and most significant defense contractors in America. Our troops and military will be caught in the middle. America is less safe for it, Putin is thrilled, and our enemies are celebrating." That's where we start the hour. Some of our favorite experts and friends. U.S. Navy veteran Kyle Lewis is back with us. We first met Kyle when we were covering Trump and Musk's first round of cuts to federal research funding that has saved Kyle's life when he was battling stage 4 cancer. Kyle attended today's Unite for Veterans rally. Joining us at the table, host of the Independent Americans podcast, founder and CEO of Independent Veterans of America, Paul Rieckhoff is here, and host of MSNBC's Politics Nation, president of the National Action Network, the Reverend Al Sharpton is with us as well. Kyle, tell me about the rally today on the Mall.
Yeah, great to see you again, Nicole. It was fantastic. Great vibe, but that's always going to happen when you get a bunch of veterans together, even though we don't agree on everything. Dropkick Murphys were fantastic. Senator Tammy Duckworth was absolutely amazing, as always. So it was a very supportive vibe. It was great, very brotherly, but also like very, resolute and committed. We all know what we're doing out there.
It's interesting that you point out that, there are political issues on which veterans, like any other group of Americans, disagree. Is there a common cause now in rallying against the Trump administration's cuts?
Yeah, there absolutely is. And what's happening against veterans is just a microcosm of what the rest of the country is looking at as well. And the big two that we're talking about here are health care and jobs, right? Health care for our veterans, including people like myself, that has been wildly disrupted, and then veterans who have lost their jobs for no real reason. It was certainly not for performance-based issues like there was lied about back in February. But the common cause now for a lot of us that wore this uniform is the social contract that exists between us and this country. And that was, we are going to go to war for you. We're going to fight to defend the freedoms of every American, everyone in this country. When we come home, you're going to take care of us. And that has never been questioned. In fact, that's something that's been a campaign issue for parties for decades now, centuries really, is that we take care of veterans. This is the first time that this is so egregiously happening, and there's an actual war against veterans by a current sitting administration. And so there is definitely a common cause now, which is this is absolutely not right. We have this contract that all of us veterans and all the American people agree to as well. You're going to provide us with health care. We're going to get access to, we're going to get things like jobs. We're going to get things like education, all these other benefits that veterans receive that are currently under attack by Donald Trump and his administration. It's certainly provided a unifying rallying cry.
Kyle, you're not the first veteran to say that this feels like, and in your view, a, quote, war against veterans. I wonder what you think it says about our politics, that that's not a three-alarm fire for Democrats and Republicans in Congress.
Yeah, right. I will say this. This issue has been going on, as you mentioned, since February, and I've been in the middle of it. I've been fortunate enough to meet with several elected leaders. I will note they are all on the Democratic side. There is not a single sitting Republican lawmaker that has agreed to meet with myself, with some of my fellow veterans, with Vote Vets, some of the other groups. I'm certainly not seeing it at any of the town halls. I'm not hearing any of it on CNN or C-SPAN or MSNBC. The Republicans have just been completely are just hiding on this issue. They're being complete cowards. The party that claimed to stand up for veterans for so long, at least my entire lifetime, that's been the reality, right? Oh, Republicans take care of veterans, and it's so blatantly not happening now. I mean, it's that whatever you want to call it, fig leaf that existed before, it's gone now. It's completely gone. Never again will a veteran trust a Republican that says, I'm going to be there for you after you get me elected. That's gone.
That's amazing. I mean, have you tried to see Speaker Johnson or Leader Thune?
Speaker Johnson, I have not. Mostly senators from some of my colleague states who are impacted by a lot of the VA hirings, and we have not received welcome invitations from any of them yet.
If you got in front of Thune right now, what would you say to his face?
I don't know. I don't know right now. You'd have to come back to me on that one.
I'll come back to you on that. We have evidence from time to time that some Republicans catch certain important guests like yourself on this program. Paul Rakoff, I'll let you jump in.
81 years ago, young Americans stood up in defense of our values. And every generation of American veterans and military folks have stepped forward to defend our values. Some of them have laid their lives on the line, given Washington with a pretty notable distinction. He's probably fired more veterans in 6 months than anyone in American history.
Wow.
And that is politically radioactive. And I think Trump is going to probably take advantage of that. But that's what they're both facing now, is this is uniquely unpopular across partisan lines, and veterans are punching back first. And I think what happened in Washington today is just the beginning, and Americans will follow.
I mean, Trump is a symptom of all this, obviously, but the enablers, to me, feel like as important of a part of the story. I mean, House Republicans represent people that, at least in the old days, they used to know. People used to know the veterans in their community. They would be involved in showing the government's gratitude and appreciation. They know where the VA hospitals are. They in normal times, fight for them. I mean, what is happening in our politics that Republicans in the House and Senate aren't being held accountable for what they're doing to our veterans?
I don't think they've gone back to their communities enough, and I think you're going to see that this summer. Because the VA cuts and attacks were also after the other cuts, right? We saw first at DOD, Hegseth was in place, Collins came afterward, and I've long said that everything they're doing in this country, they're starting at the Pentagon. Well, HHS and FBI and the VA are coming in line after that. So you're going to see similar types of cuts. You're going to see similar compromises of data. Think about all the healthcare data that's up for grabs that Elon Musk could now hold hostage because he's had folks inside the Department of Veterans Affairs. And of course, there's the symbolic value of being able to first take down the Pentagon, put Hegseth there. VA's kind of been below the radar for most Americans, but for veterans, it's front and center. And I think especially this summer, you're going to hear from veterans, and Republicans are going to hear from veterans, especially in their home districts.
Rev, I feel like there's a story that's hard to get at, and it's all these realignments, right? Veterans who are as diverse in their political views as any group of Americans coming together in opposition to these draconian cuts, and this really something bigger than that, breaking the compact that we have with our veterans. Social Security, which I'm convinced Donald Trump thinks is like a philanthropic handout, not something I don't think he understands with that line. This is people's money they pay into. All these contracts being broken do not fall. I mean, as many people from Democratic-leaning households as Republican-leaning households at 62% and 62% have received Social Security benefits, or someone in their house has. So there's not a partisan breakdown from who benefits from that. The VA community coalescing around opposition to these cuts against the Trump administration. What is sort of happening in our communities that's hard to get our arms around, maybe at a national level politically?
I think that the reason it's hard to get our arms around it is there's a realignment
going on in the country where people that were opposite party, opposite thoughts politically a few months ago are now finding themselves aligned. You have to remember when these veterans who served this country, whether they were serving for those of us on the left or the right, have to go to Washington at a time that many of them have been fired, and the guy that fired them is saying out loud that you wouldn't be president if it wasn't for me. Well, what does that mean? I mean, you've never heard a statement that undercut democracy more and moved more toward an oligarchy to say, Donald Trump wouldn't even be the president if it wasn't for me. I did the Congress. So here you have the richest man in the world who fired veterans talking about, I put you in the White House and I'll call you any name I want. And these veterans fought to preserve a country, whether they were on the right or the left, that they believed had democratic principles. And they're there in the mall, not doing what was done January 6th. They're there raising a question of whether or not this country stands up for what they fought and put their life on the line for. When I was in high school and college, we fought the Vietnam War, but we saluted Vietnam veterans. It's now like all of us are cast aside while two billionaires have a temper tantrum at the expense of the country.
Kyle, I want to ask you how your access to the health care that you need and that you credit with saving your life has been since we've last talked.
Yeah, so my story personally is actually a good one. I had my 5-year checkup on my cancer ordeal, and I'm doing well. I have no growth and no spreading, and so fortunately, I don't require any additional treatment, which I couldn't get anyway, though. I did confirm that at my hospital, Johns Hopkins, my clinical trial has no money associated with it. So if I needed to get those drugs right now, I couldn't get it through that clinical trial. Now, my doctors at Johns Hopkins are fantastic people. And there are apparently workarounds that exist that I won't get into. So there are still things happening. Doctors are, I guess that's the point that you should take away here. Doctors are making things happen for patients in need where there are funding shortfalls now caused by this administration.
But it's an extraordinary, it sounds like it's tricky, right? You don't want to say too much about it because it's tricky.
It is. Nope. Yeah, there's no roadmap for this. It seems like every case is different, right? They have to look, there are extenuating circumstances for everyone's treatment. And so they have to find workarounds that way.
So while doctors have to find workarounds, let me ask you how you feel about Donald Trump's military parade. Trump told Kristen Welker, my colleague over at NBC News, that the parade's price tag, which could reach $45 million, would be, quote, peanuts compared to the value of doing it. How does that land with you as someone who would have to find a complicated workaround should you need more medical care for something that we're very happy is in remission? But how does it land when you're having to sort of navigate this moment and Trump thinks that $45 million would, quote, be peanuts compared to the value of doing it?
Right. Now, let's talk about the military suicide hotline operators that were fired. Some of the people that help deal with our veterans in their deepest and darkest hours when they come back home, and those people lost their jobs. Why don't you spend $45 million paying those people their money? Spend $45 million on child care for military members. Spend $45 million, providing additional transportation in rural areas where veterans already have trouble getting to medical facilities. Anything that you do would be better than spending it on a parade to stroke the ego of this guy.
Paul?
I think the money is important, but the attack on our values is even more important, because the part about the parade that's most significant is this is un-American. We don't do that here. That's what they do in North Korea. That's what they do in Russia. And it's bigger than just the political stunt that it will become for Trump. You're asking the troops to be a part of a political parade. So you're thrusting them into the middle of his culture war, of his political agenda, where there will undoubtedly be, I'm sure, peaceful protests to counter-protest the parade. But he's continuing to thrust our veterans and our military into the most divisive issues of our time, whether it's the parade, it's the border, it's gay rights. I mean, everything. He's using the troops as a cudgel to try to drive that through, but there are actually troops involved. So 19 and 20-year-olds are going to have to march in this thing on his birthday, next week in Washington. And I think they're going to have a problem with how it feels in their hearts. It's not what they signed up for. And that's what I think should be most outrageous to all Americans.
Well, it's the reporting about the first time he tried to do this. I think his first idea of having a military parade for himself, which, as you said, he could have only, I think he came back from Bastille Day celebrations in France and had seen it, but as a tradition, it happens only in North Korea. I'm not sure that Russia still does them, and I don't think China does regularly as well. Trump wanted this for his birthday, and in the reporting about the efforts to scuttle this, it came out that he didn't want any wounded veterans marching with him. He didn't want any amputees or anyone who had been wounded in service of their country, and that is the vein of reporting that The Atlantic pursued that ultimately culminates in, quote, suckers and losers. The only people that die for their country are, quote, suckers and losers. So it feels like it's a big political stink bomb for Donald Trump.
Yes, and it continues to be a political prop that he wants to use. I mean, that's how he uses Hegseth. That's how he uses Tulsi Gabbard. It's how he uses a lot of people in uniform. And when they push back, like Milley did, he goes in a different direction. But there was also another
different direction. He's threatened to court-martial.
Yeah. I mean, there was also something else that was, I don't think, reported at all or underreported. Usually on Memorial Day, there is a White House reception that the president hosts before Arlington, like last week. That didn't happen this year. He didn't do it. And it's been precedent that the president always does that. All the veterans groups, a lot of the people who are marching today go to the White House, and then everybody goes together to Arlington. But that was canceled.
Why?
I don't know why. That's what I hope every reporter in America asks him today.
I'll try to get that question asked. Kyle, I'll give you the last word.
Thank you so much. If I could use it to bring up one issue that is really bothering me right now, that's outside the scope of what we've been talking about, is these horrific ICE deportations that we're seeing in our communities. These guys are rolling up in full militarized gear and going after dishwashers and day laborers and other innocent people and just absolutely terrorizing communities. First of all, that alone is absolutely horrifically wrong, and I hope everyone agrees with that. Secondly, I do want people who maybe aren't as informed to understand that that is not the U.S. military doing that. The U.S. military is not going to come rolling into neighborhoods and start arresting people. I think part of why we're seeing this increased militarized look of police in the last month, quite frankly, it's really taken hold, is this whole idea of using the Insurrection Act and martial law was shot down back in April, this thing that everyone thought might actually happen. Since then, we've seen an increased use of militarized police and ICE, I should say. This is really at the federal level, using military vehicles, uniforms, and whatnot. These wannabes are not the U.S. military. These guys are not veterans in a lot of cases. Don't confuse that. And please help stop these horrendous deportations any way you can.
It's a subject we're going to be talking about in our next conversation with Senator Van Hollen. Thank you for that. Kyle Lewis, we'll continue to turn to you. Paul Rykoff, thank you for joining us today. The Rev sticks around for the hour when we come back.
Veterans protest Trump's proposed VA cuts, risking 80,000 job losses and disrupted health care for millions. Many veterans, even conservative ones, feel betrayed by Trump's attacks on their promised benefits. The cuts spark bipartisan outrage, exposing the administration's willingness to endanger those who served for political and financial agendas. But as legal pressure mounts, attention returns to the administration's defiance of courts in the Garcia deportation scandal.
You could get him back. There's a phone on this desk. I could. You could pick it up, and with all the power of the presidency, you could call up the president of El Salvador and say, send him back right now.
And if he were the gentleman that you say he is, I would do that.
But the court has ordered you to facilitate that.
I'm not the one making this decision. We have lawyers that don't want to do this.
But the buck stops in this office.
No. I follow the law. You want me to follow the law? If I were the president that just wanted to do anything, I'd probably keep him right where he is.
Supreme Court says what the law is.
After months of stonewalling the courts, giving judges, including the Supreme Court, justices, and the American people a runaround, the Trump administration is doing what I think people believe they had the power to do all along. It is bringing Kilmar Abrego Garcia back to the United States. But he is coming back to face criminal charges that Attorney General Pam Bondi announced last hour. Joining our conversation is Maryland Democratic Senator Chris Van Hollen. He met with Abrego Garcia at an El Salvador prison back in April. Also joining us, the Deputy Director of the ACLU Immigrants' Rights Project, Lee Gallant. The Rev is here as well. Senator, I know this is your first national interview, but you've, so I guess what's your first response to the news?
Well, Nicole, this is a victory for due process. It's a victory for the Constitution. It should not have taken this long. I mean, as you indicated, the Trump administration dragged its feet for a very long time, ignored a 9-0 order from the Supreme Court. But it's important that Abrego Garcia now come home and have his due process rights upheld in a court of law. You know, I've said repeatedly, this is not about the man, Abrego Garcia. This is about his constitutional rights and really the rights of all of us, that if President Trump and his administration can trample the rights of one person, the rights of all of us are at risk. So they didn't want to do it. They said he'd never put back in the United States again. But I think because of the pressure from the courts and from others, they realized that not following the Constitution, at least in this instance, was the wrong path. I don't know if this is going to be prelude to complying with other court orders, but at least this is a good day for the rule of law.
Senator Attorney General Pam Bondi made a point of thanking Bukele at the beginning. What is your sense of what the facts are around whether or not he would have sent him back absent criminal charges?
Look, the Bukele and the government of El Salvador are only holding Abrego Garcia and others because they're being paid by the United States to do so. They have no separate independent criminal charges pending against any of these individuals. I know that because I asked that question directly to the vice president of El Salvador, who I met with, and he admitted I released the tapes because it was an on-the-record conversation where he admitted very clearly that they were just paying, they were taking people because they were being paid to.
ProPublica is reporting that the vast majority of Venezuelans sent to CICOT were not convicted of any crime. They write the Trump administration knew that the vast majority of the 238 Venezuelan immigrants it sent to a maximum security prison in El Salvador in mid-March had not been convicted of crimes. The data indicates that the government knew that only 6 of the immigrants were convicted of violent crimes. They go on to detail what they are. That's where public support lies, even for Trump's policies. 87% of Americans support deporting adjudicated violent criminals. What do you think this case, and Pam Bondi alluded to it today, she called it, quote, the bright light of news coverage of this case. What do you think it has revealed about where the American people are?
Well, Nicole, I do know in the case of Abrego Garcia that polling that took place right after my visit to El Salvador indicated that the American public believed that he should have his constitutional rights upheld, that his due process rights were important because they recognized the connection between protecting his rights and protecting the rights of others in America. And I still firmly believe that across party lines, the American people believe that you should not be deprived of your liberty without having your day in court. And so I think it's never wrong to defend the due process rights of people who reside in the United States. And I do think that's where the majority of Americans are when they focus in on the facts.
Senator, as you have stated this clearly, give us how you distinguish between people rallying around the person Abrego Garcia and what happened to him, because a lot of us that have participated in civil rights and all try to make symbols out of the victim, but you've been very careful not to make him the symbol, but what happened to him the symbol. How important is that, and how do you continue to thread that needle?
Well, Rev, thanks for making that distinction, and that is a distinction that I've made, because you know, my view is it's up to courts to resolve the factual questions. And in this case, Judge Zinnes, she's the federal district court judge in the case, has really pled with the Trump administration to come forward with facts and present them as sworn testimony under penalty of perjury. And they've not made any of these claims in her courtroom. They've not ever brought any criminal charges against Abrego Garcia. And so my view has been, to the administration, put up or shut up in a court of law. So if they're now going to take this case into the courts, as they should have, from the beginning, before they just took him off the streets of Maryland and deposited him in a gulag in El Salvador, then that is the due process that we've been fighting for. And again, not just for his case, but for others. And I think that Americans understand that everybody deserves to have their rights, respected. That's what the Constitution is for.
Senator, in the time that you spent with the family or with Kilmar Abrego Garcia, were you aware of any of the things that are detailed in today's indictment?
Well, I've heard reports from the administration. They've been saying various things over social media, some of which are included in this indictment today, some which are not included in this indictment today. I've been following the court proceedings. So, for example, Judge Zinnes, who's the district court judge, as I mentioned, said that the administration, the Trump administration, had provided no evidence to her about any connections between Abrego Garcia and MS-13 or any other terrorist activity. That was what the judge said. Now, look, if the Trump administration has other charges that they want to bring in a court of law, then that's obviously their prerogative. The most important thing here is that it happened in a court of law where the Trump administration has to make its case under penalty of perjury, not over social media, and where Abrego Garcia can have his lawyers. His lawyers have never had the chance to speak to him. I'm the only one who spoke to him because I went to El Salvador to make sure that he was still alive. His wife and his mom didn't know if he was alive. So now he's back. He's facing these charges, but he will now have a lawyer there, and he'll have the benefit of having the charges discussed ultimately in a court of law where his due process rights should be protected.
Senator Chris Van Hollen, thank you for taking the time to talk to us about this. We appreciate you.
Thank you.
We're going to bring Lee into the conversation on the other side of a very short break. Stay with us.
Senator Van Hollen blasts Trump's defiance of Supreme Court orders in deporting Garcia. He stresses the fight is about due process, not Garcia personally. Despite evidence refuting MS-13 claims, the administration created criminal charges to sidestep legal rulings, exploiting technicalities to justify illegal removals. Now civil rights advocates warn this pattern risks undermining legal protections for hundreds still detained under similar circumstances.
Lee, I know this is a evolving story, and I want to talk to you about everything on your plate today. But first, your reaction to the charges and the decision and the ability, frankly, that the administration clearly had all along to bring Kilmar Abrego Garcia back to the U.S.
Yeah, so I don't know enough about the charges, obviously, and I'm not going to speak to the specific charges. What I will say is it's fairly coincidental, maybe suspicious that all of a sudden he's being indicted. I think it looks like a way for the administration to get around the Supreme Court's ruling, saying just he was erroneously removed, just bring him back the normal way. All of a sudden there's an indictment. So, that seems fairly coincidental. Obviously, I don't know all the facts in the indictment. But I think to your point, and the larger point is, it does confirm what I think everyone's always known, is that the administration can pick up the phone at any time and get people out. And in our case, Judge Boasberg ruled that the more than 100 Venezuelan men who were erroneously sent there without any due process need to be brought back into U.S. custody. The administration has a few more days to present a plan. We'll see what they do. But certainly that's not the way to bring all these men back, is to have indictments. They need to bring them back in normal ways.
Let me read from Judge Boasberg's ruling in the alien enemies case, your case before him. Defendants must facilitate plaintiffs' ability to proceed through habeas and ensure that their cases are handled as they would have been if the government had not provided constitutionally inadequate process. Absent this relief, the government could snatch anyone off the street, turn him over to a foreign country, and then effectively foreclose any corrective course of action. Talk about where things stand before Judge Boasberg and the sort of the ripple of his ruling this week.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think this is the big ruling because he is talking about the entire class of men who were sent to CCOT that first night, March 15th, under the Alien Enemies Act. And so we're talking about, roughly 135 men. We'll see how the government handles it, whether they appeal immediately, whether they present him with a plan to bring them back. Given what I've seen so far from the administration over the last few months, I'm not optimistic that they're going to come in with a concrete plan for bringing everyone back. I think they're either going to appeal it or potentially stonewall Judge Boasberg's ruling. I hope not. But, Judge Boasberg was absolutely clear. These men were deported without any due process. And you and I have talked, Nicole, about due process and the rule of law. And I think people get that at an instinctive level, that it's not such a complicated concept. It just means the right to actually defend yourself. If you ever said to someone, look, they're accusing you of this, and just tell them you didn't do it, and they said, no, you have no right to even say you didn't do it, people would say, well, wait, that can't be. That's not, the American way. And so I'm hopeful the administration just has come to the conclusion they need to bring people back. But I think given the way they brought Abrego Garcia back, it doesn't necessarily give me hope that they've turned the corner.
President Barack Obama deported, I believe, the most people out of any American administration. And that administration was sued multiple times. I'm sure you were involved in some of those cases. But I don't recall this number of illegal and unconstitutional exclamation point riddled rulings from judges. Why, can you just give me a baseline or use the Obama years as a baseline? Why are they having such a hard time doing something that they have an enormous amount of authority to do legally?
Yeah, that's a great question, because we have said in court over and over, and Judge Boasberg has said it over and over, the administration remains free to deport people under the laws as long as they give them due process and they are actually deportable. This administration is not satisfied with that because they don't want to give people the right to defend themselves. If all these people who are now sitting at CCOT were able to go into court and show that they're not gang members, I think the administration knows that very few, if any, would actually be labeled gang members by a court. And so they don't want to deal with that. And they also want the dramatic effect of sending people to CCOT, and that's not what this country should be doing. If they have a basis for deporting someone and they give them due process, we have said all along that's what those laws are there for. But it doesn't seem to the administration dramatic enough. It wants those videos of these men's head being shaved in CCOT. And I think that's the real difference between what prior administrations have done and what this administration's done.
I mean, Lee, you also, I think, just illuminated the thread from child separation and that which was described by a Republican-appointed judge as child abuse, and this one, that it's not, what is allowed, what is legal is never enough, is never extreme enough. Lee, an enormously busy day for you. Thank you for taking some time to talk to us about all of it.
ACLU's Lee Gallant condemns the administration's suspicious timing of Garcia's indictment, accusing officials of avoiding due process for hundreds of Venezuelans deported under unconstitutional policies. He warns the government's refusal to follow legal deportation pathways threatens fundamental civil liberties and reflects a dangerous appetite for extreme immigration theatrics. And even Trump's legal allies face turmoil. Top lawyers are abandoning firms tied to his shady backroom legal deals.
The law firms that capitulated to Donald Trump are being rocked by an exodus of high-profile attorneys. The latest example today is Damian Williams, the former top federal prosecutor in Manhattan who led the prosecution of New York City Mayor Eric Adams. He is leaving Paul Weiss. Paul Weiss was the first firm to strike a deal with Donald Trump. Williams is joining Jenner & Block, one of the firms that fought the executive order against it and won in court against Donald Trump. Williams adds to the growing list of high-powered attorneys exiting Paul Weiss after 4 partners left last month to start their own firm. In a statement from Jenner & Block today, Williams says this, quote, "I've seen firsthand how this firm expertly tackles the toughest cases and lives its values. I'm excited to join a team with an extraordinary depth of legal talent that doesn't shy away from hard fights and delivers results that matter." Joining our conversation is New York Times investigative reporter Mike Schmidt. The Rev is here as well. Mike, you had the first reporting on this incredible scene of Brad Karp, the head of Paul Weiss, heading down to the Oval Office and striking what you've called a true social post deal with him. This seems to be backfiring on a weekly basis now for Mr. Karp.
Yeah, the long tail of the deal seems to have had the most dramatic impact on Paul Weiss. And I think that's largely because Paul Weiss had such a reputation for being a democratically aligned law firm before they made this deal. Brad Karp was essentially the face of the Democratic legal resistance in the first term. They engaged in a different cases in which they sued the government and helped people that were being targeted by the Trump administration. Karp's firm helped prepare Kamala Harris for her debate. And really, if you ever saw a fundraiser for lawyers for Biden, Brad Karp's name would be first. So I think that the thing is that Paul Weiss had a larger sort of sense to it, where there was a sense of a larger mission than your average law firm, where there was a feeling that not only were they, doing typical legal work, but that they were doing pro bono work and work on issues that had a greater purpose to it. And I think that when they made this deal, there were people there that couldn't live with it. I also think that what we're seeing here is some of the blowback from the Democratic base. Some of the lawyers who left last week, including Karen Dunn, had been in favor of the deal. But what some folks at Paul Weiss have said is that they couldn't deal with the blowback that came from Democrats about the fact that they made the deal, and that was one of the reasons why they had left. Whatever the case, the firm has lost Jay Johnson. The firm has lost these 4 lawyers a couple of weeks ago that went to form their own firm. And then they lost Damian Williams. Damian Williams was a big hire for them, to hire the former U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York. Damian Williams clearly has larger political ambitions and didn't think it was tenable to remain at Paul Weiss. I will say that some of the corporate lawyers at Paul Weiss are happy that these people have left.
There you have it, Rev. You get a quick last word.
Well, I know Damian Williams. I've not talked to him since he decided to leave. Very talented, very principled. I went on some cases that he knew his base community would not understand. He believes in following the law. And I think that from what I know of him, that's what he decided to do by leaving Paul Weiss. I was not surprised, even though I've not talked to him. He's a principled guy.
Yeah, and that seems to be the fault line here. Mike Schmidt, thank you for your reporting on this and for spending time with us. Rev, thank you for being here for the whole hour. It was topsy-turvy, and we were glad to have you here with us. We'll see you this weekend on Politics Nation. There's more breaking news since we've been on the air. The Supreme Court has ruled to allow the Department of Government Efficiency, that's Doge, Elon Musk's former pet project, immediate access to our Social Security data, including sensitive personal data. They're going to allow that while legal challenges play out in the lower courts. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson dissented from that decision, questioning the need for the court to intervene on an emergency basis, essentially asking why the nation's highest court has intervened in this question at all. Writing this, quote, "The government wants to give Doge unfettered access to this personal, non-anonymized information right now before the courts have time to assess whether Doge's access is lawful. In essence," she writes, "the urgency underlying the government stay application is the mere fact that it cannot be bothered to wait for the litigation process to play out before proceeding as it wishes. That sentiment has traditionally been insufficient to justify the kind of extraordinary intervention the government seeks. But Once again, this court dons its emergency responder gear, rushes to the scene, and uses its equitable power to fan the flames rather than extinguish them. Wow. Another break for us. We'll be right back.
Prominent lawyers exit Paul Weiss after its controversial deal with Trump. Damian Williams, former U.S. attorney, joins a rival firm opposing Trump's executive orders. Paul Weiss, once known for Democratic causes, faces backlash for aiding Trump, highlighting deepening divides within America's legal community over ethics and political loyalty. If you value sharp analysis, fearless truth-telling, and cutting through the political theater, this is your home. Subscribe to Miles Vexler Reaction, hit that like button, and join the conversation as we expose the power games shaping America. Stay informed, stay engaged. We're just getting started.